When I first visited Belarus 20 plus years ago, it still felt very Soviet. So, let's see how it feels now. In addition, I'd also like to find the answer to the following question, and that is Russia and Belarus effectively the same place? So you kind of got the new alongside the old, in parts. In fairness, the new does seem to be in the minority. So you see that you've got the past, the present, this side, and then the future there. I think actually that Belarus has had and is having some economic support from Russia, China, and even some of the Middle East countries as well. So, got quite a few friends. In fairness, poor Belarus, it gets a bit of a hard rap sometimes, but I mean, you know, is it any worse than anywhere else really? Look at that, that's quite a surprise. A modern puppet theatre. Wow, I certainly didn't expect to find that here. Generally speaking, the main streets still seem to be called Lenin Street, although with the Belarusian I instead of the Russian I. So I might as well say a few words about the language here, because what's interesting is, here in the west of Belarus, no one seems to have a problem speaking Russian. Everyone's speaking Russian, there's Russian signs everywhere. This is the first language really. Whereas in the days when I used to go to Ukraine, in the west of Ukraine, a lot of people there, you know, didn't like speaking Russian. So in Belarus there hasn't been any kind of de-Sovietization or anything like that. Like they did the big program in Ukraine. So yeah, you know, the Belarusians have maintained good relations with Russia. I'm not quite sure why Ukraine chose not to. I guess a bit of a nationalistic hold took place there, unfortunately, and now we've seen the results with the war. But here, all's calm. But I mean, if ever the West tried to interfere in Belarus, then basically it'll be Ukraine all over again. So what you've got to understand is that Ukraine and Belarus, I mean, they're sacred places for Russia. Both of them were completely destroyed during the Second World War, and Moscow built them all up from scratch, from nothing, built up all the industry, all the agriculture, built up everything. So you know, Moscow's not going to let go of Ukraine or Belarus easily. The other ex-Soviet republics, you could take or leave them, but Belarus, Ukraine, don't mess with them. That's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's kind of a newish building or whether it's just a Soviet building that they've tried to do up a bit. I mean, tried to, I say. I think probably the latter. And over there, that's kind of cool as well. You've got a big tube from the factory sporting the Belarusian flag. Good to see the old Interlist hotels are still alive and well. Look at that over there. Old Central Universal magazine. Every Soviet city had them. So what's funny on the main street, like this side, yeah, you feel like you're not in Belarus, you feel you're in Central Europe. But then like this side, welcome to the Soviet Union. Why does pretty much every shop need a Belarusian flag? Okay, that's kind of interesting. KFC is still called KFC in Belarus. In Russia, it changed its name. But really, I'm going to take with a pinch of salt anything I see on these pedestrian streets in the very city centre, because obviously it's not very representational of the city itself, I wouldn't have thought. So I managed to get a good vantage point of a good row here of many Soviet blocks. And I mean, look, of course they're ugly, everyone knows that. But, you know, they're serving a purpose. They're housing the masses. You know, all over the country or over the ex-Soviet Union, they're housing millions of people. So, I mean, if you knock them down, where's everyone going to live? It's a bit of a cold, as you can probably hear, but all good apart from that. Now Grodno is almost a bit like Brest.
with regards to the fact that in the city centre it doesn't feel at all Soviet, but in the outskirts it certainly does. So this is a pedestrian street here I'm walking along, and it's quite nice, but it's sort of been spoilt a bit by these arches, which I think is completely unnecessary. You don't need all these arches because you've got the lights on the top. So it differs from the cities in Russia, whereby even in the city centres in Russia they still feel pretty Soviet. Whereas here it doesn't. It's just on the outskirts of the cities. Not even the outskirts, but just not in the city centre. So, I mean, you could argue it's only really in the political sphere that Russia and Belarus are the same. In many other areas, they feel like two quite different places. So I think Belarus is a really interesting place actually to come. If you want to come to this part of the world, it's better to visit Belarus than Russia. It's a lot more chilled out here, a lot more relaxed. It's a smaller travelling distance, it's closer to Europe, etc., etc. So actually I think Belarus, yeah, it's well worth visiting if you want to come to the region. Obviously you don't want to go to Ukraine at the moment, a lot of people don't want to go to Russia, but wow, in Belarus, open for business, and you know what? It's a pleasant place to come. In the less Soviet parts of the country, it actually feels kind of quite well-to-do, actually, It feels like walking around somewhere in Central Europe or somewhere. In fact, I'd probably say, with the exception of the Baltics, Belarus seems in a better state than pretty much anywhere else in the ex-Soviet Union. I mean, obviously I know there's a war in the neighbouring Ukraine at the moment, but even before the war, I did a big trip around Ukraine. Ukraine was in a wretched state, really, whereas Belarus is completely different. Now, Ukraine next door was heavily industrialised during the USSR. Belarus was not as much so. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it still feels nice here. And also, Belarus has always tried to have good relations with Russia. So, it's not just money from Minsk that's going around the country, it's money from Moscow as well. And I think that's probably the main reason why Belarus does feel quite modern and well-to-do in places. A lot of the time here I've noticed the old meeting the new, and I think that's kind of good, It's keeping its Soviet heritage, but as well becoming modern Belarus.